Hello, my name is Anne Russell and I'm doing chapter 7 of my book Alcohol and Pregnancy, My Responsible Disturbance. I had to decide whether I'd put makeup on for this, and I was thinking, oh gee, it'd be really nice if I didn't have to put makeup on. Men really do have it all, don't they? If I were doing one of these videos, I wouldn't have to worry about it. Anyway, so this is chapter 7 and it's called Africa. I returned to the United Kingdom after visiting Georgia, St. Petersburg, Tbilisi, Kiev and other parts of Russia and the Ukraine. However, instead of returning to Wales, I went to Plymouth with a couple I had befriended on the tour. They asked if I was interested in taking a trip through Africa. They had actually purchased a truck and had begun the work required to outfit it for the type of terrain and distances it would be travelling. I was excited about visiting Africa and grateful to have been befriended by these adventurous people. For 3 months prior to the departure date, we spent almost all available daylight hours working on the yellow 3-ton Bedford lorry. My job was to visit the local rubbish dump to look for items that I could recycle or reuse in our project. We were eventually able to fabricate cabinets from the bits and pieces that I'd collected. I think this is where my love for recycling and reusing items actually started, because it was just really a lot of fun in those days when you didn't have to go through a buyback shop. You could actually just rummage around in the dump. The cabinets were assembled along the side of the back of the truck and would hold our personal belongings such as spare clothes and other essential items. In between the cabinets were modest seats bolted to the floor, seating 8 people. Another passenger would sit in the cab with the driver, 10 in total. With the truck nearing completion, the organiser of our adventure, Jack, placed an advertisement in the paper for passengers interested in travelling with us at a cost of £150 per person. Because I had assisted with the rebuild, I was able to travel for free. We had no shortage of interest in the project, so we needed to find some way to identify those people who were like-minded or at least would not cause problems within the group. Each person was asked to visit us so we could gauge compatibility. Eventually we had the full complement, each seated on one of the seats in the back of the truck with their luggage in the chest beside them. The first leg of the journey was from Plymouth along the edge of Dartmoor through the New Forest to Southampton. Jack drove the truck onto the cross-channel ferry and thus began the second leg of our African adventure. The first leg. We journeyed through the middle of France into Spain and down to Malaga on the Costa del Sol. After some time in Malaga, we proceeded through Torremolinos. We had the most amazing time in Malaga on the beach one night. We were all sitting on the beach around a fire, drinking and talking, with the stars above, the ocean at our feet and the sand all around us. I will never ever forget that night. There are many things that stand out in my memory on this trip, but the 4 most surreal occurred in the first month of our journey. The first, this night on the beach in Malaga, another again on a beach in Morocco, one around a campfire singing Leonard Cohen in the middle of the Sahara, and the last one on a mountain in Cameroon. Our intent had been to drive to Cape Town through the western route and return to the United Kingdom through the eastern route. By the time we had driven through the Sahara, Niger, Nigeria, Central African Republic and a short visit to Zaire, Jack was ready to return to his girlfriend in the United Kingdom. Our proposed 6-month expedition through Africa lasted barely 2 months and terminated in Yaoundé, the capital of Cameroon. Most of the others opted to return to the United Kingdom with Jack, but I wanted to continue this wonderful adventure through Africa. I was really loving Africa. With the last of my African money, I purchased a flight to Nairobi in the hope I'd be able to pick up another truck heading south. A very small plane, a Fokker Friendship I think, was to make 3 stops before we disembarked at our destination of Nairobi. The first at N'Djamena in Chad for a 2-hour layover, then Khartoum in the Sudan, and the third in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia before flying on to Nairobi. As we disembarked the small plane in N'Djamena, which used to be called Fort Lamy, for our short stop, we were told that we would not be leaving for Khartoum that afternoon as expected. Well, I didn't know why at the time. With nowhere to go and no idea when I would be able to leave Chad, I wandered round the rapidly clearing airport. That airport, actually, just as an aside, was the most amazing airport I've seen over in Africa. It had a marble fountain in the middle of the foyer, or the airport terminus, I suppose. A marble fountain. Actually, that's all I can actually remember of it, but it was just so out of place and so weird, because Chad was one of the 5 poorest countries in Africa, in the whole of Africa. Anyway, so on the second level of the airport, I found a large boardroom. It was kind of weird too, I suppose. The floor was covered in lush red carpeting and the windows draped in heavy curtains for privacy. I piled my bags into a corner on the left of the entry in the hope no one would bother me for a few hours. I lay down with my bag for a pillow and slept. It was early evening when I awoke, and it was clear that no one would be travelling anywhere, not just to Nairobi that day. I gathered my belongings and walked away from the airport and in the direction of town, as I hoped. As I'd used the last of my money on this flight, I couldn't check into any accommodation, so I wandered with no real destination in mind. On the banks of the Chari River, I came across a hotel, and as I recall, that hotel was like 2, 3, 4, 5, very similar to the ones in Russia, actually. Just, not cubes, what's a rectangular solid? Anyway, a rectangular cube. But this one had about 5 or 6 floors, and outside they had some alfresco dining that had a large Olympic-sized swimming pool, but it only had 6 inches, no more than that, like a couple of feet of water in the bottom. Kids were swimming in it too, but it was pretty dirty. On the banks of the Chari River, I came across a hotel with an alfresco dining area surrounding a large Olympic-sized pool. There were several little brown and black-skinned children joyfully playing in the water. While the pool was quite big, it only contained a small amount of muddy water at one end. The first night I slept with my mosquito net draped over one of the restaurant tables. The ends of the net dangled down the sides of the table, and I could poke them underneath my sleeping bag so no, things would get me. So that night I was raised out of a deep sleep and jolted fully awake in the very early morning by machine gun fire, mortar rounds exploding, rapid fire weapons and other noises, and screaming. By the time it occurred to me that I was in the middle of a firefight, people were screaming and running from the hotel. Later that day, I was told by a guest that during the morning, about the first time I heard the mortar shells, the presidential palace housing the soon-to-be deposed head of state, President Tombalbaye, had been captured by troops led by a general, or a person called General Maloom. We were told that Tombalbaye had been hung, drawn and quartered, which meant he had been killed and then cut into 4 pieces, or perhaps not even killed first. Each piece was then dragged around the town behind a horse. After the fighting ceased, I went for a walk to take a look at the damage that might have been done. And I found this mud brick, and I'm just recalling it in my mind as I'm talking. It was a mud brick type building. It was larger than the others, and it had these, I go on to say, it was late in the afternoon, so I sat down by a smallish swimming pool. It looked almost surreal against the backdrop of thousands of shell casings just around on the ground, and this mud brick building was like pockmarked with obviously bullets, but just had all these little holes in the side of the building. So I'm not sure why somebody would shoot. Anyway. So as the day slowly turned into evening, while I was sitting there, it was really beautiful. It was, as I said, it was surreal. It was weird and surreal. Just sitting there at the swimming pool with these shell casings all around. I actually picked one up and kept it for a long time. But I started noticing that little birds, had begun to fly over the pool. I think they were swallows. I sat silently taking in the incongruity of the moment. My first impression was that the birds were dancing. They swooped down, skimmed across the top of the pool, and then flew up into the air, and then did little twirly things and peeled down again to skim across the water. It was just amazing. I didn't know if they were drinking, using their beaks as ladles, or trying to scoop up insects which had flown a little too close to the water. I just loved watching them perform this little dance. It was so amazing. They did it time and time again, and so accurately. They never actually, poked their little beaks too low into the water and drowned or got, it was just quite an amazing. These little swallows were a dazzling contrast to the terrible damage caused by the coup. No one was able to leave Chad for over 10 days. Those of us staying at or near the hotel were held in the hotel grounds under curfew. It wasn't quite a hostage situation, but because we could walk around close to the hotel, but beyond that was cordoned off, and it was sort of hostage in a way, I guess, because they knew that the people who were staying at the hotel were probably not indigenous to that location, and so they wanted to keep us sort of locked away because they didn't want the media attention from other countries. And I guess they were also thinking that if worst came to worst, they could always sort of use us as potential hostages if they needed to. There was only a few of us. There was only this huge hotel, very similar to Russia, a huge hotel with only very few people staying. I met a French couple and their little girl. He was an engineer or something to do with mining. North of Chad, or in the north of Chad, and I met two freight pilots who'd flown their plane to drop off freight, and then there was me and then there was me and there was some Swedish or Scandinavian people. 1, 2, 3, 4, probably about 5 or 6 Scandinavian people. Yeah, and that was about it. My visit to the Swallows had occurred before they had organised this security. At the time, I didn't believe it was to protect us. I was sure it was to contain photographs of the coup and the aftermath from the outside world. The week after the president's death, the security detail became more flexible and we were able to move around a little more freely. I had dinner at an open-air restaurant called the Étoile du Chad. I think it's the Star of Chad, I think. I remember looking at the stars and experiencing a sort of epiphany. I must have been concerned about how I was going to get out of Chad, but I was young and silly. I think I was, I would have been maybe 17 or 18. Very young, very clueless, very naive. I must have been concerned, and I must have been a bit nervous about the guards with their guns and knives who seemed to be around me and other white people no matter where we were, but I still felt good, better than I had felt for a long time. My epiphany? I was free. At least for the moment, I felt freer than I had ever felt in my life before. In the middle of firefights, battles and bloodshed, I was happy. That doesn't really sound very good, but it was true. It was incongruous and not a little embarrassing to be feeling so good when I knew that people around me were suffering. But my heart was light and my mind unshackled from my mother's destructive influence. The most appalling experience of my young life occurred during the days after the takeover. There were still small firefights taking place around the town, and the heavily armed soldiers remained alert. I decided that morning to watch the hippos on the river. I think it was the Chari, wasn't it? I think I said that before. So I sat down on a small hill overlooking the Chari River. There you go. I can't fathom why I was sitting in the sun on the bank and not under a beautiful acacia tree. It was huge, around 15 metres upstream. Hippos were lumbering around in the water. I could hear gunshots, just a few here and there. Maybe the aftermath of a couple of firefights. One seemed to be quite close, perhaps just in front of the hotel, and I was at the back. And never seemed to dodge, I don't know. Like I said, naive and clueless. One seemed, if I had known, this is really awful, I would have run away from that place as fast as I had ever run in my life. Just as I was thinking that I probably needed to move from the closest fighting, I heard footfalls and shouting, and these footfalls were really heavy. I'd say, army boots and that sort of thing, police boots. I turned from the hippos and I saw several people running toward the bank of the river where a canoe was tethered. When they reached the bank, they hauled the canoe into the river, but before they could get too far, they were grabbed by soldiers and herded away from the canoe. Now, I know I've got a lot of blanks in my memory about what happened, and I'm not surprised. I remember the people being caught at the canoe, but then nothing until they were under the acacia tree, this beautiful big acacia tree. I can remember lots of screaming and crying and the horrible thunk of hoses and gun stocks hitting these people and breaking their bones. And unfortunately, I don't know if I go on to say, but there were children there as well. I have an idea there were two families, like a mum and a dad and a child, and another mum and a dad and a child. They're actually hitting the babies and the toddlers, or however many kids there were. They're actually hitting them. I mean, it's brutal over there. It really is. It still is. But my God, I had never. This was. So the parents apparently were trying to get away. Over the river was a different country. Might have been Zaire. I'm not sure. Quick look at an atlas or Google would tell me. But if they'd been able to get across the river, they would have been away from the fighting, and obviously they wanted to protect their children. Anyway, these people, these army people, or the whatever army people were hitting these babies and kids first. The parents tried to get to them. I understood then that the soldiers were not going to stop hitting these people until they were all dead. I had no way to process what I was seeing. Nothing before or since had prepared me for what I saw. Perhaps nothing could ever prepare anybody for that level of violence and almost complete disregard for human life. Once the children had stopped moving, they set upon the men, leaving the women until last. I wonder now whether they raped the women. I really don't remember anything. I don't remember any of it. I think I stood up. I don't know whether I go through this. Oh yeah. So I'm not sure I remember the sequence correctly because each time it changes slightly. Sometime during that carnage, I stood up sick to the death of the sounds of torture and the little kids screaming. Perhaps even worse, the begging of their parents and the little kids stopping screaming. I wanted to get away I'd like to think I wanted to try and stop them, but it was a bit too late for the kids. That really caused me a lot of grief over the years. Obviously PTSD or something had a hand in it, but I always thought, and while I know this book is about FASD, I always thought that somebody else would have done something, somebody else, another person would have stood up and done something. They could have, I don't know, but I always thought I was weak, and I always felt guilty about those people, that I didn't actually really try hard to do something about it. So when I stood up, I kind of wondered whether I was trying to stop them. Obviously that couldn't have happened. I don't think I was courageous enough to face down soldiers with weapons, so I suppose I was trying to get away. A soldier used his rifle to indicate that I was to remain where I was. I did as I was told, too shocked to refuse. I remember staring down the barrel of his rifle. It was, yeah. Memory of that incident on the riverbank left me almost as soon as it was over. I thought the fighting remained fairly constant in and around the town over the next 10 days, but reports say the fighting only lasted 48 to 60 hours. That was on the internet. I don't remember what happened after the people were killed, how they managed the bodies, how they got away. They could have driven trucks up to take the bodies, they could have left them there. I have no idea. Later that week I was caught in a firefight and shot. It was only a little deeper than a graze, but it still scared me a little bit, and I was a little bit more careful when I heard firefights and shooting and stuff. A little less naive then, perhaps. Again, my recollection of this incident, along with a lot of other things that happened in Jemina, became hazy almost immediately after the event. Eventually we were all able to leave Chad. I had become quite sick, and I remember landing in Addis Ababa, willing myself not to faint. I think I had pneumonia. I thought if I fainted I might be trampled or discarded or something in the airport there. I actually remember this quite well, even after all this time. I remember saying, I will not collapse, I will not. Yeah, it was a will. It was, yeah. Sorry, just remembering a couple of things while I'm reading this. I never thought I'd read this book again. Anyway, I thought I might be trampled or discarded or something. I was pretty sure that all bets would be off anyway. Whether or not that would happen in this busy foreign airport, I didn't know, but I didn't want to find out. I do remember this absolute decision that I would not faint as I was walking from the plane to the first aid room in the airport. I walked slowly, too fast, and I wouldn't make it. I'd had a lung infection and something else that made my body ache. I knew without a doubt that had I been in Australia, would have been in hospital. Yeah, I still think that. After undertaking the remainder of my journey to Nairobi and spending several weeks in Nairobi recuperating, hardly able to move without pain, I purchased a seat on another truck leaving for South Africa. There were so many other incidents in Africa, only some of which I can now remember. I remember being charged by a very large elephant with beautiful big large tusks, leaping into the back of the truck with centimetres to spare, almost eaten by a hippo because I stupidly chose to swim in this part of the river, and I was belted up by a little old lady in Lusaka. She had a walking stick, and as I walked past, she sat on me. She got this little walking stick and she started hitting me. I hadn't done anything, and I expected she had a mental health problem, so I just defended myself until I could get away. She was pretty lively too, by the way. We visited some exceptional places on the way to Cape Town. I particularly enjoyed Tanzania and Kenya, especially Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, and I would return there in a heartbeat. We arrived in Cape Town 2 months after leaving Nairobi. I travelled from Cape Town to Perth by boat, but when I arrived in Perth, I found that my mother had timed a visit to coincide with my arrival. Oh yeah, jeez. It didn't take long before I realised I could never live with her again. I didn't even want to be near her. I wore long-sleeved shirts and jeans when she was around. I locked the bedroom and bathroom doors, and I never walked around without being fully clothed. I was very aware that I was a young woman when I was near her, and I recognised that I would be forever grateful if I could keep a lid on the memories that caused these feelings. Very cleverly, I have. After only a short time back on the Gold Coast where I'd spent my teenage years, I applied for a position in Weipa as an emergency services radio operator. I was very lucky to get this job. Over 292 applicants. Wow. Since Weipa was a mining town, alcohol played a considerable role in any social activity. My drinking had slowed down in the latter part of my African trip, but had started up again when I returned to Australia. For many years I hid the things that had happened in Africa from myself, always wondering why I became anxious when someone startled me and why I hated fireworks so much. And I still do. I don't know if I have PTSD or not anymore. I certainly did many years ago, but I still have that startle reflex, and I still hate fireworks. Even though I know why these things, I still think fireworks. Yeah, maybe it just reminds me of those people under the tree. But I hate them anyway. Although I now have no other signs of PTSD, I still have strong... I still have a strong and often embarrassing startle reflex. Not much was known about PTSD in those days, so it was a long time after my symptoms began appearing that I sought advice. However, the quickest, most effective therapy of all turned out to be alcohol. I'd been in Weipa for only a couple of days when I encountered Don in the mess hall. As I entered the room for my evening meal, I knew from experience the night before that all eyes would be on me, as one of only 7 females in the single quarters. At the time, there was only one single woman to every 90 males. In the centre of the hall, I saw a big man stand up. He was wearing a singlet and his hair was so long and curly it looked like an afro. He caught my eye because he appeared to be walking my way. The last thing I wanted, actually, because it was a horde situation where there was so many so many men and so few women that it was you just did not want any more men to sort of come over and want to talk to you. Excuse me. Anyway, but as he came closer, there was something about his eyes that caught my attention. They were my favourite colour, blue, and they appeared to be both intelligent and kind. My initial annoyance toned down a little by this impression until he squatted down next to my chair and said, in an Australian drawl with a bit of something else, "You coming to the pub tonight?" Couldn't help it. I had to giggle. It was the worst line. Anyway, I still fondly remember this first exchange with Don. I could never have imagined loving this man for almost half a century based on that first exchange, but I wouldn't change a thing. As my love for Don grew, so did my drinking. I was still only 20 years old at that time, and heavy drinking was an acceptable part of mining life. Too much had happened to me too young, and I had too many memories to bury. Unfortunately, our relationship was not destined to last in those first few years. I left Weipa alone and completely destroyed. I flew to Sydney. When my mother found I was in Sydney, she flew there to be with me. My life was a living hell until I was given the chance to leave by crewing a yacht sailing to New Zealand. After many emotionally challenging months, Don proposed to me while I was in Auckland. My mother had again taken the opportunity to fly from Sydney to New Zealand to be with me. It was as though she couldn't live without me. Yet when she was with me, all she did was made me miserable because I never did what she expected me to do. Sorry, that's my husband, his mate. She believed yelling and hitting me would make me like her. I don't know whether she believed that or not, but it seemed like it. She couldn't seem to grasp that I wasn't her. In fact, I was so not her, I was surprised I was even related. I was also terrified she would want to live with Don and I, and although I was somewhat damaged by her dominance, I knew I would never allow her to hound me the way she had done. Hound me and Don the way she had done me. So several months later, in December 78, Don and I were married. By that time, Don was working as a plant operator in Greenvale, a nickel mine about 220 miles west of Townsville. The town of Greenvale was quite different to Weipa. There were only 200 people working at the mine until it shut down in 92. It had opened in 1976, and Don and I moved into our flat in 1979. So at that time the township was only 3 years old and consisted of accommodation for the employees and their families, a supermarket, a service station, a hotel, a butcher, a takeaway shop, and a bank. Town life revolved around activities at the hotel, and this became a focal point for Don and me and almost every other family in town. And that was chapter 7. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it. This book is on Amazon if you do want to read it, and I'd be very grateful. Obviously, I'm never going to become a millionaire with this book, but every little bit helps. So, yeah. Okay, and the next chapter will be chapter 8. I will see you.